Okay, let's continue where we left off. So we're talking about um, desires and cravings. And when this is related to sexuality, the issue becomes need. We are sexual beings and can practice our sexuality, but we should not need sex in a way that is compulsive and grasping, that controls us in the same way animals are controlled by appetites. There may even be times when we should redirect our sexual energy toward other drives. We should overcome lower urges and strive to nurture inside of us that which is wise and compassionate. Now we turn to suffering can be extinguished. The third noble truth is that craving can be extinguished. The revolutionary and optimistic idea of Buddhism is that suffering will disappear when the root cause of suffering is eliminated. The cessation of suffering comes when we confront the cause of suffering and, free of all existence, we enter nirvana. Buddhism is not pessimistic because of the truth that future suffering can be avoided. We can prepare for what we cannot avoid. We need to be reprogrammed from the bad habits of choosing to suffer. We have trained ourselves to suffer instead of training ourselves to live with awareness that problems are internal instead of external. Liberation cannot be explained with words or concepts. We become free when we deconstruct what is false and experience the extinguishing of desire, the end of hatred, and the cessation of illusion. There is hope because we can destroy that which keeps us from freedom. Desire is eliminated when we extinguish the three fires inside us: greed, hatred, and illusion. Embracing suffering teaches us about the true nature of reality and helps us appreciate the way things really are in life. We can be happy through experiencing what is real, already present, and already inside ourselves. And now we turn to the Eightfold Path. How do we realize the cessation of suffering? We can take specific steps toward this objective, explained in the fourth noble truth. This path of training is called the Eightfold Path, where we gain enlightenment through mental discipline. The fourth law offers a systematic pathway. It is a proven path, and liberation is the result of walking this journey. The Eightfold Path is a system of habit training where discipline builds a better self. Impermanence is a fact of life, and all gains will either be lost or will require a lifetime of guarding in order to keep. And we are eventually going to die and lose everything. Because experience is impermanent, we need to focus on experiences that encourage spiritual purification. These teachings provide guidelines for insight and morality. The order of the Eightfold Path varies slightly among Buddhist traditions. In one model, the first three steps of the path deal with our mindset. The problems we experience will be solved as we think about them in an accurate way. To begin, right understanding is required along with right aspirations. Without right thought, we will drift in the wrong direction. What we say and do are governed by our inner being. If our minds are defiled, we suffer because suffering grows in delusional thought. Right thinking is free from a results orientation that seeks a specific outcome. Right aspirations lead to experiences of a life that is clear, relaxed, simple, fresh, and open. The third, fourth, and fifth guidelines of the Eightfold Path deal with morality. Right speech means avoiding slander, idle chatter, and lies. Whenever we use harsh or false speech, we hurt ourselves. Words should promote harmony. Right action is predicated on living the first three steps of the Eightfold Path. Right action is not stealing, being greedy, or misusing intoxicants that dull our ability to be mindful. The goal of right action is to be a person who has a comprehensive understanding. Right action is being intentional about what we buy and generous with what we have. Right livelihood means we will not earn money through selling liquor, slavery, the abuse of women or children, or anything that has to do with the taking of life. Our work should never harm others. We should not choose a career based only on a desire for wealth or fame, but out of a sense of calling. The sixth guideline of the Eightfold Path is right effort, where we develop alertness as well as inner awareness. A disciplined life of truthful vigor expresses excellence. The seventh guideline is right mindfulness. Liberation comes through directing the mind into a constant awareness of the truth. Listen to your feelings, bodies, and minds with awareness. Even if circumstances are chaotic, we can live with skillfulness, centered in a calm knowing of what is meaningful. Buddha gained awareness while in meditation. Meditation literally means to cultivate or develop spirituality. Right meditation opens the doors of life, sealed by the iron grip of countless misconceptions. Silence is at the heart of meditation, like a clear forest pool that can reflect the trees that surround it. Meditation helps us live along a proven middle pathway of healthy freedoms and provides a steadying practice through life. We do not meditate in order to speak with a God. We meditate to deepen the richness of our lives. Right meditation is an entryway into insight and helps cultivate self awareness. Meditation often begins when we sit down with some aid, such as an object like a stone or a basket. Next, we concentrate on the object intensely and try to exclude other thoughts. Sometimes repeating statements or phrases can help focus our minds and calm restlessness. Resting our minds allows us to lift worries away. When we are mindful, we live in the present moment. Let's look at nirvana. A noteworthy theologian, that's a Christian theologian, claimed that every religion is centered on one main idea around which all other beliefs revolve. Within the vast forms of Buddhism, there remains one shared goal: freedom. Enlightenment does not come from being good, but from being aware of what is true. Paths to liberation begin with the Eightfold Path, expressed in philosophy, ethics, and spiritual disciplines. Eventual release from human suffering is the result of practicing the Buddha Dharma. To enter enlightenment is to transcend into another dimension. Buddha's path helps us gain clarity of mind. Enlightenment is more than a remote promise of a heavenly peace beyond death. Nirvana is the end of all searching for paths. Human nature, bound by delusions, is blown out like a candle blown out in the wind. All suffering, delusion, and anxieties fade away when entering nirvana. No definition of nirvana can be precise. It is a reality of spirit and heart more than a geographical center. It is a place of bliss, calm, and supreme joy. Nirvana annihilates that which must be destroyed, the flames of ill will, delusion, and sensuality. Suffering need not be repeated. Is nirvana the desire to be extinct or the opposite of self fulfillment? This might be something that critics would say. Peace means freedom from every worry about the future. Nirvana is the result and not the goal to be sought. Everything grasping is illusionary and impermanent. In nirvana, the wheel of the cycles of life is finally silenced. What of an individual remains to enjoy bliss after death if the doctrine of non soul is true? Possibly another question the critic might raise. So it might be easier to explain that nirvana can be savored only in the present tense. Buddhism is for now. Gaining nirvana in this life is not synonymous with extinction. Nirvana is attained in this life and it overcomes a world inflamed by lust, delusion, and hatred. Buddha refused to describe the material reality of a place called nirvana. If it is a place, then it is a realm of serenity, passionlessness, and happiness. Once nirvana is experienced, it eludes all further description. It is not an end, but the beginning of enlightenment. Uh, when one enters nirvana, one does not exist, but nirvana exists. Let's turn to Bodhisattva ideals. Bodhisattvas are loving teachers who um, widen the path of deliverance. They intercede to assist us. They spread compassion and share their great merit with all who turn to them for help. The most renowned of all the bodhisattvas is Avalokitesvara. In China, this figure is identified with the goddess of mercy, Guan Yin. All who call on the Avalokitesvara Buddha will find deliverance from their sufferings through the merit of this loving power of ultimate compassion. Avalokitesvara is one of the most popular bodhisattvas and appears in many forms, including as Guan Yin in China, Quan Am in Vietnam, and Kennen, Kansan, and Kanjizai in Japan. He reigns with his female counterpart, Tara, in a realm of miracles called the Potalka. Each bodhisattva embodies a distinct trait we should aspire to cultivate. For example, Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom and insight who penetrates into the fundamental emptiness, universal sameness, and the true nature of all things. He is also the bodhisattva of poetry because he empowers language to bring insight. He is a lover of science and is often portrayed as a beggar focused on knowledge. Humans who express the attributes of Manjushri include Albert Einstein, James Joyce, and Winston Churchill because of their communication skills. Summit Samatap Bhadra is the bodhisattva who works to translate ideas into action. He is often represented as riding the back of an elephant because this massive animal has the forceful ability to make things happen. Notable people that embody the forceful actions of this bodhisattva include activists Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, William Blake, and baseball star Roberto Clemente. Kashid Garba, which is Jizo in Japan and Dizang in China, is called the monk hiding as Mother Earth. She is the protector of children and travelers, including those traveling through the afterlife. She cares for those who are suffering, just as a loving mother cares for her children. Bodhisattva Vimal Kirti is called the thundering silence of the unsurpassed layman because he was once a commoner who gained enlightenment. Unlike other bodhisattvas, he began as a human, but over time gained supernatural powers which he uses to awaken spiritual insight. His name means undefiled glory because his actions bring glory to the Buddha. Finally, many Buddhists await the coming of the Buddha Maitreya. Sometimes representations of him in China are of a Zen monk named Udai. In Japan, he is called Hotai. His name means the loving one, and his presence promises hope for a brighter future despite present problems. He is a Messiah figure, the way that Christians think about Jesus and Jesus' return. So he's a Messiah figure who bestows merit from a vast celestial treasure ship to end social injustices. All right, let's turn to chapter 6, the mission of the greater path. A golden age. Buddhist teachings spread rapidly across northern India. An increased reception to Buddhism coincided with a wave of urbanization leading to greater social mobility and openness to newer ideas. Buddhism was attractive because it allowed for the intermingling of social castes and genders in a way Hinduism did not. In addition, Buddhists formed monasteries that became models of egalitarian community where people from all social strata lived together. 200 years after Buddha's life, a cruel dictator underwent a dramatic conversion to Buddhism. King Asoka in central India, who lived or reigned from 273 to 232 BCE, became known as the Dharma King and one of the most devout king patrons of any religion in history. Asoka established a host of public works, and during his reign, a golden age of Indian Buddhism flourished. Ashoka never forced citizens to embrace Buddhism. Because of its sponsorship of missionaries, Buddhism spread throughout southern Asia and gained a ready audience among the animist tribes of Siam, which is present day Thailand. Temples were built wherever missionaries traveled. Local gods were renamed as lower level spirit helpers. Ashoka's death in 232 BCE was a turning point that set the stage for a new school of thought, Mahayana or Greater Path Buddhism, to emerge. So let's look at the rise of Greater Path Buddhism. While Orthodox, meaning Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia, held close to the strict disciplines of the Buddha, Greater Path missionaries in China, Tibet, Mongolia, Korea, and Japan stressed that the compassion of Buddhist truth embraces everyone, as was also taught among early Buddhists. The spread of the Greater Path led to a host of often wildly syncretistic variations, meaning incorporating elements of earlier religions or mixing different teachings. Greater Path Buddhism ranges from the Tibetan expressions of mystical ritual to the Japanese Zen focus on emptiness full of possibilities. In its flexibility and its emphasis on compassion, the Greater Path has made a vital contribution in reinterpreting Buddhism. The Greater Path is more accessible to a greater number of people. Most of us cannot afford to give up our work or family responsibilities in order to live in a monastery. The Greater Path teaches that we can attain enlightenment without extreme commitment. Theravada critics felt that there was an otherworldly quality to the Greater Path that leads to error, an overemphasis on the supernatural instead of on disciplines and moral exactitude. Another argument against the Greater Path was that its followers accepted rituals without precedent in earlier practices, such as the shamanistic practices and emphasis on magic in Tibet. Let's look at Greater Path mission movements. Greater Path missionaries spread the Buddhist teachings with an unceasing willingness to adjust to the cultures they were trying to reach. Their objective was to present eternal truths dressed in local clothes of cultures they encountered. They also advanced their message through business and medical means, using any tool at hand to create receptivity to their teachings. So they did everything to make their teaching more user friendly or acceptable to the people, or to communicate in a way they can understand it. So, along with Zoroastrians, Buddhist itinerant preachers were the world's first missionaries. Their communities ethically modeled the meaning of their message and made skeptics more receptive to their teachings. When the first monasteries were established as mission stations, they functioned without any cultural or economic distinctions. All members of the communities saw one another as sisters and brothers in a united family. This helped their message find a steady reception across Asia, which longed for equitable social change. The first Buddhist missionary was Buddha himself, who set the example by teaching for over 4 decades. Compassion motivated Buddha to share what he had discovered. Dedicated missionaries followed Buddha's example and lived in abject poverty, thinking little about their own comfort or safety. Because committed missionaries were willing to adapt their message to any audience, they became skillful in diplomacy and students of human nature and psychology. They were known for respecting the faiths of others, such an attitude fostered in listeners a willingness to consider their message. Let's look at missionaries in Central Asia. In the 7th century, Greater Path missionaries reached Tibet, where their beliefs became joined to the resident ancient mystery rituals or esoteric or occult rituals. At the same time, Muslim interventions into northern India conquered the initial base of Buddhism. Buddhists also survived the Muslim invasion But Buddhists who survived the Muslim invasion either fled northward into Tibet and China or widely merged back into Hinduism, which began to see Buddha as a venerated avatar, meaning an incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu, um, comparable to the figure of Krishna, we could say. While Buddhism was gaining followers in other parts of the world, it became almost extinct within India by the 13th century. Greater Path missionaries became active on the broad steppe lands of Central Asia, but were only able to establish themselves within Tibet, Mongolia, and Siberia because Islam was largely unable to extend into southern Asia. Most of this area remained under the control of Orthodox Buddhist monks. The Chinese and Japanese had relatively few encounters with Islam and remained mainly supportive of Buddhism. Let's look at the Diamond Path. Flags with a prayer to the jewel of the lotus are common in the hills of Tibet. The prayer is recited by local devotees to gain merit. Tibet's very topography lends itself to imagination, with its high mountains and thin air, and the veil between the visible and the unseen seems thin. There are many stories about how the Buddhist message came to Tibet. Missionaries arrived in Tibet at the invitation of local kings. The most famous missionary was Guru Rinpoche, who arrived between 755 and 810 CE. Tibetan king Songtsen Gampo, who was um, lived from 615 to 656 CE, was converted to the message by his Nepali wives. However, the arrival of Buddhism was strongly opposed by local rulers who were comfortable following their favored shamans of the Bon, meaning the truth religion. So shamanism is usually a more followed by more primitive tribes. We think of African or primitive Asian tribes, or Polynesian, or even Native Americans. They all have similar types of practices where we call that animism, where they believe spirits were influential throughout the natural world, nature spirits, and they contacted them through certain rituals and may have had certain uh, things we would think of as being magical types of practices as well. The most effective Greater Path Tibetan teacher was Milarepa, born in a small town in 1052. Milarepa was first a shamanistic wizard with sensational powers before converting to the path taught by Buddha. He miraculously survived many trips to India and became a saint and poet who gained legendary status in the hearts of his people. Tibetan Buddhism emerged as a mixture of the indigenous Bon shamanism, tantric practices with their symbolic rituals and secret meditations, and the teachings of missionaries. Bon shamanism is an animistic tradition rooted in Tibetan and Persian sorcery designed to overcome evil forces by channeling the subtle energies of the body to transform both the inner mind and the external world. Because the Mongols ruled Tibet from 1222 to 1238, they played a key role in bringing Bon shamanism to Central Asia. The Mongols imagined the world filled with spirits who lurked everywhere, even under layers of human flesh and inside bodily fluids, which were believed to have mysterious powers. Tibetan Buddhism developed into four major schools of practice. The largest of these not only revered Buddha, but also honored the most revered goddess in the Bon pantheon, Kanjuru. That's a name which means skygoer or traveler in space. Missionaries accepted these other beings because the Tibetans were certain that the high peaks of the Himalayas were home to cruel demons that needed to be appeased through various incantations or spells or rituals. Spirits were consulted by shamans through ecstatic trances and ritual possession ceremonies. So they believed that their rituals, led them to become possessed by these spirits. So, with this foundation in mysticism, the scriptures that gained the largest following in Tibet were the doctrines of Tantric Buddhism. Tantric texts reveal how one can perform magical ceremonies to ward off evil spirits and avert disasters. There are also many prayers for the dead that are consistent with the Bon tradition. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is a series of prayers to be read to the dying as they prepare to journey into the worlds beyond. The hidden doctrines of Tantric Buddhism are decipherable only with the assistance of a teacher known as a lama or a guru. These teachers provide prayer wheels to help gain favor with the gods. They also transcribe magical mantras, which are words or phrases that bring safety and ultimately the celestial reward of nirvana. For Tibetans, visual art, music, and chanting are pathways that one can open to enter spiritual truth. Art is not only explanatory, but also transformational. Art from the heart empowers as it calls observers to the noble path. Truth can come through the imagination and not only through cognition. One of the most renowned forms of Tibetan art is the mandala, which is a many sided symbolist diagram or work of literature used to explain cosmic revelations. Mandalas serve as maps to enter an inner spiritual environment. Dreams were also interpreted in seance sessions with spirits, demons, fairies, and ghosts. At least they believed these various beings were present, uh, and revealed themselves to them in some way. So Tantric Buddhism relied on ritual trances that carried devotees into heightened mystical states of ecstasy. Tantric Buddhism created an entirely new system of yoga that emphasized physical gestures as sacred movement. Another practice often equated with Tibetan Buddhism is the use of prayer flags and prayer wheels for meditation. These meditation tools create a serene environment that releases positive spiritual energy. Major Tibetan Buddhist writings are divided into two portions: the Kanjar, which consists of 108 volumes, and the Tanjur, which has 225 volumes. These mysterious texts are accessible only to the initiated because they are written in code. Tantric writings contain magical spells, descriptions of divinities, and sets of incantations arranged for meditation and ritual use, instructions in worship, and in bestowing consecrations. In Tibetan Buddhist cosmology, a host of lesser gods, fiends, demons, ghosts, and fairies live in the underworld as well as in Tibet's mountains and rivers. These lower spiritual beings were often described in travel tales. Spiritual forces are both good and evil, with the king of darkness and evil being Yamataka, sometimes just called Yama, the lord of hell and death. Tibetan Buddhism is also referred to as Vajrayana, which means thunderbolt Buddhism or diamond Buddhism. These terms and images are used because diamonds are indestructible and precious, while a thunderbolt is a fierce expression of power that sometimes comes as a surprise. Because Tibetan Buddhism is so unique in its various rituals, it is sometimes classified as entirely separate from the greater path. Of the four schools of Tibetan Buddhism, the two major groups are the Gelugpa and the Nyingmapa, or ancient ones. The Nyingmapa school is distinguishable by the red hats that priests wear. It is the oldest form of Tibetan Buddhism. The second group is called the Gelugpa, or virtuous ones. They are also known as yellow hat Buddhists since their priests wear yellow hats. This is the largest group of Tibetan Buddhists and is presently led by the Dalai Lama. With the beginnings of yellow hat Buddhism in Tibet, politics and religion were joined together to create a ruling class of monks. Although he has officially retired, the Dalai Lama remains the de facto political head over 12 billion Tibetan Buddhists, while the Panchen Lama, who was presumably held captive in China, is designated a spiritual leader. Each Dalai Lama is seen as a manifestation of Buddha, Avalokitesvara, and more than a mere human. Other Buddhas are believed to have appeared at different times across Tibet. While there are dramatic differences between Tibetan Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism, Tibetan is like other forms of Buddhism in significant ways. For example, right meditation has the same meaning in Tibetan Buddhism as in other traditions. Tibetan Buddhists, isolated from other Buddhists, draw their desire for independence from the soil of their ancient homeland. Let's look also now at Chinese Buddhism. Greater Path missionaries came to China over the triple barrier of mountains, deserts, and oceans 500 or 600 years after the death of Buddha before the first century CE. By this time, Buddhism had already undergone many changes. One legend claims that the emperor Ming Ti, who ruled from 57 to 75 CE, had a vision of a huge Buddha asking China for assistance and sent gurus from India to teach Buddhism in China. At the same time, the first missionaries to the Middle Kingdom joined merchants arriving on the Silk Road from the remote plateaus of Central Asia. The people these first missionaries encountered were ripe for conversion. Confucian Taoist traditions had devolved into philosophies that did not deal with the otherworldly worries that common folk had about the afterlife. Buddha's ideas became a viable alternative for the political elite because the Han Dynasty was crumbling and leaders uh, were looking for new ways to consolidate control. The ruling class held to Confucianism, while commoners turned to the magical rituals of Taoist priests to channel the power of spiritual forces. The combination of Taoist philosophy and Confucian ethics provided an ideal context for the welcome reception of Buddhism. Both Taoism and Confucianism dealt with issues of this life and did not speculate on the afterlife. There were also similarities between Taoism, Confucianism, and the Greater Path's way of seeing the world. While Buddhism began partly as a response to the rigid class system of India's Vedic or Hindu traditions, early China had a less stratified society, which helped Buddhism take root in China under the direct patronage of various rulers. The most difficult obstacle that Buddhism had to overcome in China was its rejection of materialism, which conflicted with China's values for survival, wealth, and family. Buddhism's spread across China was slow but steady. By the 4th century, large monasteries had been established, serving as centers for teaching and social outreaches. By the 5th century, translations of key texts were completed, which provided Confucianists with clear paths to study Buddhism. Monks won over fearful bureaucrats, wary of rebellion by building strong, loyal alliances with local authorities. Buddhists sought to convert the Chinese by rendering Buddhist practices more palatable and less foreign. Missionaries were careful to make no overt attack against ancestor worship or the local gods of commoners. While foreign Buddhists sought allegiances in China, uh, they were careful not to impose any power they might have gained. A truce emerged between the political ethics of Confucianism, the philosophies of Taoism, and the Buddhist practices. Buddhism's influence in China was not one-sided. As Buddhism began expressing itself in art and literature, it became more accessible to Chinese intellectuals. Taoist doctrines of emptiness and discovery through an intuition began appearing in Buddhist teachings. Confucian rulers extended patronage to monasteries as a way of bringing them under control. For over 1,000 years, the authority of Buddhist monks dominated the religious practices of China. However, key elements of Buddhism never took root, such as emphasis on bodhisattva intercessors who dispense merit, a stress on faith over internal analysis, and a rejection of amulets and charms as superstition. Let's turn to Guanyin. A strong emphasis in Chinese Buddhism was placed on gaining merit toward enlightenment. Buddha was portrayed as a savior, while other bodhisattvas came to represent different deities already worshipped within the Chinese pantheon of gods. These deities included Wenshu, the god of wisdom, Amitabha, lord of the Pure Land and the realms beyond life, and Garbha, the rescuer from the torments of hellfire. Guanyin remains China's most revered deity. This goddess of mercy uses her powers to release petitioners from trouble and rescue them from poisons, sickness, and ghosts. She is a kind of guardian who answers prayers, and she continues to reappear among humanity in many forms, often in our darkest hours of need. Let's turn to Tiantai. There are four major schools or types of the Greater Path in China. Broad categories blur the fact that many other schools emerged, and some of those mixed the teachings of various schools, as well as local beliefs from other religions, into their teachings. Notable Buddhist Chinese schools included Tiantai, Huayan, Shan or Pure Land, and Qingtu. Tiantai Buddhism was codified by the monk Ziyi, who lived between 531 and 597 CE. The goal of the school was to unify the diverse strands of Chinese Buddhism into one house. So this school, also called the Lotus School, has gained a wide following worldwide through the teachings of transcendental meditation. According to the Lotus School, one gains eternal merit simply by reciting the Lotus Sutra and by venerating Buddha, appealing to his sense of compassion. Okay, I think we'll stop the lecture here for today. We'll pick up next week with Huayan and Pure Land, and we've got a little more to cover in this section of the different schools of Buddhism. But I want to go ahead and give you the assignment. Again, the attendance assignments, it's the same every week. Assignment 2, 1 to 2 paragraphs and 1 page maximum, so please don't go over 1 page in writing this. But what is the main idea you took from this week's lecture? So just write something that you learned. You don't have to summarize everything in much depth, but just something that I can see that I know that you watched the lecture and interacted with it to some extent. So that is the attendance assignment. And for the extra credit, if you want to gain more points, again, this should be 1 to 2 paragraphs, no more than 1 page, to answer these 2 questions. 1, briefly describe in your own words the major teachings of Buddhism. So we covered a lot, but you can focus especially on the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, or any other things you think are the main points or the main teachings of Buddhism. But don't go into too much depth, kind of keep it brief. And then the second, briefly describe the major types of Buddhism discussed in this lecture. So we focused mostly on Mahayana forms, like Tibetan and the Chinese forms. So just pick the ones we talked about and describe them briefly, maybe a few sentences each. Don't go into too much detail and keep it again under 1 page for both these questions. So please send this to me the next week or so. And if you have questions about the assignment, about the class, or about the paper, let me know. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And again, if you would like a copy of the notes for the lecture or the paper topics or anything else, just request that in an email and I'll send it to you as soon as I can. Hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next time.